Hi. Hello.
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 Hello, and welcome to Architecting.
I'm kind of a wannabe architect who had the great good fortune to discover early on that I really stink at architectural design.
Without thinking about it, I said, well, I don't know that we get cool projects. I feel like what it is it's like BYOF, man. You have to bring your own fun to the thing you're doing. Because we don't have to go explore villains in layers. We don't have to do that at all. But we choose to.
Hey, hello, and welcome to Architecting. This is the show where we look at the act of being an architect, the people and the stories behind the images and the buildings. With our very interconnected international world that we live in, this podcast will be purposely focused and narrow. So we're just going to be focusing on the community of Colorado designers. I'm Adam Wagoner. I'm a Denver-based architect. I'm married to an architect. I have 2 architecture degrees from Kansas State and from Yale. I've worked for firms in Kansas City, Wichita, Rotterdam, New Haven, Mexico City, and now Denver, where I'm an architect at Open Studio Architecture and teach at University of Colorado, Denver. I really love being rooted in this Colorado community, getting to know other architects. And so now I've decided to broadcast these conversations with the goal of making a stronger community here in Colorado. So this brings me to the person today that we're interviewing is one of the first people I reached out to in Denver. This is Brad Tomecek. So for me, it's pretty easy to look up to Brad and the work that he's pulled together. I see his work and the work of his firm as being one of the most kind of curious and striving and academically kind of focused bodies of work within Colorado. I like to judge architects and their websites based off of the amount of drawings and diagrams and physical models they have, and Tomecek Studio does not disappoint in that realm. So Brad went to school at the University of Florida, and he co-founded Studio H&T in 2003, which later turned into Tomecek Studio in 2013. So Brad and this firm have won a number of awards, especially from the AIA Colorado, where they won the Young Firm of the Year award in 2008, and then again in 2020. He was also named the Young Architect of the Year for AIA Colorado in 2012, and also by the National AIA in 2012. So he's a young, forever young guy. He's been on almost a kind of uncountable amount of AIA juries and lectures, as well as being a kind of consummate studio instructor at the University of Colorado. So I've really appreciated Brad as a mentor and a friend, and I'm glad to have him on the show. There we go. Nice.
It's like massive technology issues.
Yeah, I've been going back and forth on if this is worth it, and it's like, Zoom would be a lot easier and it'd be a lot less nerve-wracking, but it's kind of fun to have people on here. Like we had some people watching that kind of disaster of us trying to connect, but
it's like two button requirement. It's like,
yeah,
like what's next?
Exactly. I'm definitely an architect, not a professional podcaster here, but
that's all right.
Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for joining.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is good. So, I have this outline of questions that I kind of started from, and I'm trying to figure out if this first question is right. But what I'm trying to say is so what would be your 2-line bio if you had to say who you are in kind of like a quick, like 2-sentence kind of thing?
Architecturally related?
No, I think it's like, so for me, it's the interesting thing of like what people say, because of how they would explain themselves in like 2 sentences, you know?
I say 2 words: relentless curiosity.
Really? That's really funny because, like, I expected, when I wrote that question, I expected people to be like, okay, I'm an architect, I'm an educator, I'm a dad, I'm a whatever. But you and Blake Moyer have answered that question almost the exact same, where he said something like tenacious something, you know? But so what were those 2 words? It was
relentless curiosity.
Relentless curiosity. Yeah. I think even in your introduction, I said that I thought your bodies of work was one of the most curious in Colorado. And I was trying to figure out a good word of like that idea of searching and like pursuing, but that was the closest I could get. But I could see it being misconstrued in a different sort of, like, it's a curious thing, but I don't know.
Sure. I think the other piece of that, another way to say is maybe overthinker, like, or just like thinking as a hobby.
Yeah.
Like just constantly like, I wonder.
Yeah. That's a good, that could be like a tagline for this podcast: architecting, thinking as a hobby. Maybe that word. But so, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, 'cause I think that that's a commonality we probably all have, right? I mean, if we're putting stuff together and, you know, in this, you know, in the multitude of pieces and parts and things and craft and uniqueness and just assembler of things or maker of things, that I think all architects have that commonality, whether they're doing huge skyscrapers and assembling pre-manufactured parts, or whether you're cutting and welding steel.
Right.
Like there's just this, like, you know, makerness of us that binds us all.
Yeah. So that tables nicely into, so how did you get there? Like you've got this very defined kind of skill set and mentality. Has it always been there? Where are you from, and how did you get to this point?
Well, I mean, literally, I'm from the East Coast, from Florida, and you know, always had this, you know, even as a, you know, architecturally, even as a kid, looking back, I think, you know, always drawing and making stuff. I mean, I think, again, like, I don't think that that's like that uncommon. If you're an architect, you were probably doing that stuff. So I never think of this as like some type of groundbreaking knowledge. But I think, you know, literally making drawings and then going out and building something. I don't know, a sunglass stand. I would draw it first, and I'd go find materials, and I'd go make it. Realize it never quite looked like what I was thinking. But I mean, even on the early, you know, early days, it was always that. And certainly there's Legos and tree forts and, you know, pretty boy kid stuff-ish, you know, stuff. So I think that's...
Yeah, where in Florida are you from? Like,
Orlando. I mean,
really?
I was born in South Florida, you know, Fort Lauderdale, but my parents moved pretty early on, you know, back in, I think, like 78. South Florida was getting too populated for them, if you can imagine what it's like now. And in Orlando, I guess Disney had just opened in 72-ish, maybe 71. So, you know, Orlando was an old Orange Grove town, middle of nowhere, until Disney showed up. And then Disney brought, you know, population and growth. And, you know, it's funny to talk about Disney, because I think the very thing I probably observed going to, like, I was a season passer, like I went to Disney. That's what you did in Orlando, right? It was it was a destination. So, but what was really interesting was, as a young person, seeing atmospheres being created, like literally like a library, like right next to one another, and kind of becoming aware. I mean, I remember standing in, you know, the park and looking and being like, man, that's like Bavarian, and this is like like it was like this encyclopedia of place. And while I struggle with the fakeness and the themeness, you know, when you get, you know, as I started to get older and learn about the reality, materials, and truth, and all those kind of things, I think we like to, you know, preach about. The reality was, you know, Disney was taking things he had seen globally and trying to bring them back. And how do you do that other than recreate them? Even though it wasn't of its time and its place, it was of a different discussion, I think. So the very thing that got me interested in, now I'm like all, truth, honesty, real materials, all that was really this fake thing that was a replica of something else. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, that's really funny. It really is like an encyclopedia of architecture at 3/5 scale or whatever, right? Right there for you too. So then, was it a pretty clear path to University of Florida for you? Like that was it. Was it like, yeah, I'm going into architecture, I know, or was it bumpier?
No, I think it was. I think once I got clear about bigger picture, like where am I moving towards, school or not school? I mean, I don't think it was coming out of high school is kind of like, how do you know what you want to do out of high school exactly? You know what you're interested in. As a drafting class, and those things came very easy and it was fun. It was kind of like where my heart probably where I gravitated towards art classes, those kind of things. But I think once I had conversations with people that were in the design world and knew that's I actually funny enough went to University of Florida because I didn't know the disciplines exactly. I actually had a friend say, hey, I have a friend in DC making like $500,000 a year as an interior designer. I was like, that sounds great. I think I want to do that.
Where's that friend? Yeah, really.
Right. And that was back in the 90s, right? So I actually went to Florida into the interior design program, but like Florida was set up that all three disciplines of interiors, landscape, architecture, they all kind of take the first 3 semesters were all identical for all of those disciplines. And I mean, it wasn't, 6 weeks into design studio that I was, my teacher's like, why would you do interiors if, you're limiting yourself if you just do interiors, but a good architect does his own interiors. And while I didn't know exactly what he meant, I kind of sensed that made like that was logical. And so immediately changed my major. And like once I got there and saw what was going on, I was like, oh yeah, I need to go this direction.
Because you had those 3 semesters where everybody was together. Was it a full 3 semesters? And then you kind of chose architecture or interiors or?
Kind of. I mean, I think they just pulled everyone together. So it was like 101 was like, hey, here's basic architecture history, whether you're going in any one of these directions. So, but I literally like middle of that semester, like a month in or whatever, literally changed my major. But that's partly not knowing. I mean, I think about a lot of these 18-year-olds that are going off to college that like, how do you know enough about yourself to even know what you're interested in or what you want to do? Yeah. And I actually feel like my path was pretty direct, but even like as you make me slow down and think about it, it wasn't so beeline.
Yeah. So then let's talk about the path after school. So you graduated, and then what was next after that?
I was working for a local. I was interning in year 3. Like, I mean, I think there was that natural like, hey, I'm going to have to work, and why not work in the field I'm interested in? And I worked for an architect who worked for Morse out of Dallas, like a long time ago. He basically set up shop, opened up his own firm after, Morris brought him to Orlando. And he lived in this really ritzy neighborhood. And I wouldn't say he was a good project manager and a good assembler of process and spaces, but I wouldn't say he was capital A architecture. So we were doing a lot of high-end designer homes for sports stars, basically. I mean, if you know anything about Orlando, Isleworth, if you follow golf, I mean, that's where all the sports stars live. Shaquille O'Neal was living there at the time, Penny Hardaway, Payne Stewart, Tiger Woods, was coming up. We actually did a competition for Tiger Woods for his house, which he never ended up building anything on that property. Payne Stewart, high-profile golfer. If you remember, he died. His plane lost pressurization, just kind of kept flying, and that was a big deal. That happened while we were working on he and Tracy's house. So there were these amazing, like, budgets and materials. Like, you could never say, like, these aren't really great projects. Like, they were amazing. They just weren't architectural. They were, like, Spanish Mediterranean, but I needed to be 20 bedrooms and da-da-da-da. And it was a good place to learn, but I felt there was a huge disconnect between the UF education I was getting, which was incredibly forward thinking and theoretical and, all about space, and then what I was actually doing. And I think for a long time I was trying to understand that gap between school and practice that seems to happen so often. You hear a lot of people that go through these programs like, that's not real architecture. That's not, that's not the real world. That's not. So I did. So I interned for that person. Good businessman, good, positioned himself really well. But I actually was able to get an internship down south with the architect Don Singer, and he was out UF, but he went to Columbia for grad school, and to give a sense of who he is, he was a really well-known regionalist. And he won House of the Year for Arc Record back in '65 and '66 back to back. So
wow,
I don't expect anyone to know him, but he was thinking about space very abstractly, light, very clean spaces. And I think that was the turning point where I realized there's architecture as business, and then there's architecture as making and beauty and craft and design, and that it was possible, and it wasn't this. Not the real world. It's like, no, actually it's exactly, that can be a reality.
Was he making it work from like a business standpoint as well? Or was he kind of was it like you and him in a shack somewhere down in Florida, like doing stuff? Or he was also a good businessman and
very well established and very well known, and had ultimately went on to do like the FAU tower, like be the, designer of that. And,
interesting.
And he was doing a lot of high-end, residential and commercial work. I was just a, blip in their culture. I ended up being there for about a year and a half of breaks and summers and that. But it's funny how time expands and contracts. Like just the small amount of time I spent with that group and just their passion for what they were doing. And, they're winning awards, and they're just the language. It's like, it's no big deal. It's just like, this is what we're doing, right? This is how we do it. But then having that counterbalance between another architect, who I had worked with, which was more like, don't do this and don't do that. And this is how we would do this, and don't think too far out of the box. Let's keep it, keep it standard so we can keep cruising and, do more projects and probably, in his world, make more money.
Right.
Know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
it's so interesting how there's so many different ways to do architecture, right? To be a firm, and if you're not switching firms every year or whatever, or jumping around, you have your sort of reality, and you don't know kind of what those other realities of firms can be. I think that's one reason why I want to do this podcast, is just the kind of like, how's Brad doing it? How's Blake doing it? How's, and what is that kind of connection there, or disconnect? But so
I think that's really important, Adam. I mean, I think I spent, even when we first started Studio HT, and so, I mean, I guess to complete the thought was I moved out here after, I realized I need to make a shift. I'm not staying. So after Dawn, I went back after school to the firm I'd been working for, because I didn't know what to do. I mean, I graduated and, I just went home basically, and I kept doing what I was doing and worked there for about a year and a half. And I was like, you know what, this is not, it's funny how you have these moments where people just say things back to you, I think, like reflectively. But Carlos Zapata, which was a really well-known architect down in South Florida, who ended up going on to kind of work on Wrigley Field. But he was a very deconstructive, doing these really amazing crafted projects. Came to speak at the AIA Florida, and I was talking to him afterwards, and he said to me, we were just talking, and I was like, oh, I just love your work, blah, blah, blah. He's like, yeah. He's like, so what are you working on? And I mean, just the way I talked about it was like, yeah, it's nothing really special. It's not really great. It really, blah, 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 blah. And he just looked at me and goes, sounds like it's time for you to move on. Like, and literally, like, for him, it was just a fleeting comment. And for me, it was like this moment, I was like, oh my gosh, like, he's totally right. What am I doing?
Yeah.
So, from there, I went to Barrett Studio in Boulder, and David has, always, he was very sustainable, but always forward thinking, very poetic in the way he approaches his work, and worked there for 2 years. And then, going back to Studio HT, which is a firm I launched with a good friend of mine from grad school, Christopher Hare, who's now a builder I'm trying to remember his firm's name. I forget it. I can't believe I forgot his name.
I can edit that out for you. I can snip it.
Yeah, perfect.
There
it's Collaborate Builders. Yeah, she's with Collaborate Builders. you go back to this, like what's out there. I think you're still looking around going, okay, how are people doing this, right? Like, how does this work? And if you're trying to give cliff notes and shortcuts to people, which I think this podcast, this is what you're saying, like, how are different people doing this? And I look at the different people you have, like on your podcast, like, right, Blake's doing really big scale stuff, and that's amazing that he kind of like jumped off from where he was, and now there's big stuff. And Dina's been doing it for a long time and kind of in different ways, and then he's got this whole New York, Jackson Hole, Denver thing. So how did things just evolve organically? But I think I spent the first 10 years just kind of like, how's everyone doing this? And I kept hearing the same answers, which was, man, these big firms, I always thought like the big firms had the answer, right? Small firms were the ones kind of like chasing their tail, but the big firms got dialed in. And every time I talk to people, they'd be like, man, you're probably more systematized, more organized, more in touch than, like from what I understand, the bigger firms always had kind of this carnival in the background happening. And so after a while, you just start to trust that. And then it just got to a point where I was like, I don't even know that I care how people are doing it. Like, what am I doing? And, how do we make this work? How do we develop a culture and approach projects really the way we want to approach them?
Right. So what was the idea when you started HT? And was there like a project that started it off, or is it just, hey, we got to do something?
I got laid off from Barrett Studio, and that's because of 9/11. So, he had grown to 18 people, and he went down to 8, effectively, and I was number 9. So,
wow.
I guess you could say I just missed the cut from, and I get it, as a firm owner later on looking back, like I totally get it. And so while that was disappointing, it was kind of that moment where I was like, I don't know that I want other people making those decisions for me, right? Like, I'd rather follow my own sword than, wait to get cut by someone else. And so that, kind of is what started it. And really, Christopher and I, we I went out on my own, and I was just like, I'm going to make a run at this, and just see what we can do. Not really knowing anything. I mean, other than hopefully asking some good questions along the way. But I went out on my own, and then like 4 months later, Chris was like, I'm doing the same thing. I'm like, he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to. And so we were just really sharing work and working together. And it was always part of the deal, because we started, we did his house. His grandparents left him a piece of property, or it came through the family. And so there was always this intent when I moved out to Colorado that we'd kind of work on his house together. Which we did. I mean, that was like our first like fun, like, abstracted, how do you build on a slope project. And it was featured on Dream Home HGTV, 13 episodes. I mean, it was kind of looking back, I'm like, damn, like I can't even get that now, let alone back then. It's, it's kind of like, that doesn't even seem like it was the same.
What was that?
Group.
Is that house on your website? What's it called?
A box house. I don't think it's on the current website.
Okay.
But it was, basically a concrete ribbon that carves the site, and you put boxes in and on.
Nice.
I love simple sentence descriptions.
I like that, with your own bio and with the concept.
Yeah. So that was kind of a fun moment for us. And I mean, I think that gave us a little credibility, being young, that, somehow we were featured or whatever. It doesn't mean we knew any better, or we had the history behind us or expertise, but I'm losing track of the question.
So that was bringing in money. Like, how are you eating? Were you eating?
Oh yeah, no. We were doing contract work, and then we would do like, parents, friends editions. And I mean, it was all small stuff. I mean, it was so grassroots and organic. I mean, Christopher and I literally put $300 in the bank, and like in a account. And that's where we came from. Nice. So there was no lineage of work. There was just, let's just talk to a lot of people and try to make the most of the opportunities. So yeah, I think it's almost funny looking back, where whatever the project was, it was like, well, it's just we're just replacing trim in this house, but what can we do with the trim? Like, I mean, it's really that kind of, I don't know, just that desire to improve things or to reconsider things.
Yeah. Denny was talking about that when he moved to Jackson, and it was like 5 years of kind of hitting his head on the wall in a way, and just trying to find those special moments in each project. So like, how long was that period for you? Was there a project finally that was like, oh yeah, we we've kind of made it more, or is it just a slow gradient?
I think slow gradient's the short answer. I mean, when I think about starting out, we were doing work for other people, which was kind of cool. Like we were helping a landscape architect out with, drawings and things like that. And you're learning a little bit more about the landscape world. Um, you know, Christopher's brother wanted to do a ski house in Silverthorne. So
Nice.
that felt like a pretty, like, wow, this is a moment, like this is a project we can do from ground up. And so so his brother had us do a kind of a ground up place. I mean, I look back and I bet we were doing it for like $8 an hour. Like when you start looking like all the time we put into it and, the deal he was getting, and, you don't know what you're doing. Like, well, I don't know. It's just a weird transition. But, having discussions with people like the trim carpenter, because we're talking about taking, like, we want to do these nice deep wood jams, like 1x6s, and, the carpenter's like, well, how am I supposed to drive a nail like long ways through a board without splitting it? Yeah, I mean, it's like that knowledge, like learning
Right.
from subs, and like, okay, well, it's a good idea, but how do you execute good ideas? So, I mean, that was a pretty interesting project, and then you have a lot of infill. We did end up hooking up with a fairly forward-thinking developer, Cornerstone Homes, where, it kind of started out where we were kind of slightly affecting some of their old stock and reconsidering it, building stock and building plans and all that. But then we started doing one-off new builds. So, Alpine's probably not on our website. It might be buried in kind of the prefab. It was a German prefab panelized system. But then
right.
Fractured was kind of one of the highlights of working with them. And that's kind of like, I guess, the lesson in educating a client over time. Like we went from kind of taking their stuff and modifying it and trying to make it better to them saying, well, what would you do if we did something new? And also their leadership at the time was kind of getting more into the, let's do projects that like there's only a few buyers for, which is really, from a developer standpoint, a really forward thinking position, because most of the time, like, make it as vanilla as possible so everyone can have it.
Right.
And this person was more like, no, let's go ahead and take the risk that when those, that CEO comes into town, we're one of two projects he's going to buy. And so that was kind of, a nice way to end that relationship, because I think we started to move on from them after a few of those homes. But they kind of kept, they kept new clients coming in, and we were doing, new houses and things, but, fairly tame stuff. But I think if we look back, I mean, there was always, throughout the year, there would be, in the early years, 2 or 3 projects that I think we were really excited about, that we weren't just trying to, breathe magic into something that was kind of like, those 3 projects were actually really real projects. And then, the HDTV thing, I think people found us and said, hey, we like your creativity. Like, what can we do? And so, I don't know, I feel like we were fairly lucky early on, because, always some percentage of our work was really exciting. And I remember talking to Harvey Hine, gosh, probably 10 years ago or even longer. He's like, if you have one good project in your office a year, like, you're doing great. I remember him saying that. I'm like, damn, then I must be doing, then we're doing pretty good, because there's a whole handful of projects that we like. But, it's still that kind of upward climb, and there's some regression here and there. And, sometimes, it seems like less and less the further we go on, but, there's still those moments where I'm like, oh, we seem to be dropping off a little bit, or like, oh, how did this project turn in from this thing to this other thing that's less exciting, So.
Right. Yeah, because it's so easy to like look at your website and say, man, every project he does is good, But it's like, I think I've asked you this before. What % of your projects do you put up on your website, and which ones just don't get up there?
Now,
Yeah.
probably. I mean, well, the last few years, everything's on our website that we're working on. I mean, lately we don't have this kind of underlining
Nice.
keep people busy, but that's also size wise, right? Like we don't have a huge staff. If anything, the daily conversation is like, oh my gosh, do we have to bring someone on? And then my guys are like, just relax. Like, we'll get through it. Like, let's not, cause I tend to, do this a little bit more, but I also would say that if they're not up on our website, sometimes it's because I don't want to have like 600 projects. I want to curate like what we're presenting, and it's getting harder because the lists are getting longer, and it's hard to cut some of that stuff off. But soon it's all going to get lost amongst each other because it's not clear because there's just too much. So, which I think is a good, it's a good problem to have. I mean, when HT split and Tomecek Studio started in 2013, we kind of went and cleaned house, but there's still there's a handful of projects where I'm like, damn, I really think that should be somewhere. There's some cool things that just are forever buried that I don't know, but
then you end up just printing them off on boards and putting them up in your tall ceiling space anyway, like behind you. But
yeah, right. Yeah.
So what happened there with HT? What was that? What was that end like? Because that was about like 10 years you guys were together, or?
Yeah, it was 10 years. I mean, it was 10 years of kind of relatively like, I don't say quick growth because we never got really big, but it was 10 years of kind of, I don't know, we were just doing fun stuff. I mean, whether we're exploring prefab modules or importing panels from Germany, I mean, I do look back and go, dang, it's like, how'd that happen, right? I mean, I think one thing just leads to another. We're doing a container house back in 2008, which it was pretty it was pretty bleeding edge back then still. But I think it's just talking to people, having conversations, talking about what you're interested in, and not being afraid to kind of move forward. But, I think HT just kind of got to a point where, I think Christopher always kind of wanted to build. There was kind of discussions about, where we want to head. Ultimately he's now a contractor. So I think, it became looking back, it was, I think, inevitable, that it would happen. But, we got a Denver office, and he kept the Boulder office, and it was kind of like, let's divide and conquer. And instead it feels like it more just divided. I mean, I was never a fan of, it's funny to say today, but like, Zoom conferencing, the group like the culture started to shift because we started to be, I commuted to Boulder for 10 years, and it was fine. Like, I liked it. It was actually kind of a nice piece of my day where I got some downtime, whether I was on the bus or driving. But ultimately it just seemed like we started, like, it was like when we split, it was like, oh, why don't you just take your projects and the people you're working with, and I'll take my projects and the people it was so clean. It wasn't like this, like we were always super embedded early on, and it seemed to become a little bit more siloed. So just seems like it was time. And I do think, like, I remember talking to actually our client who was the Cornerstone Homes, Dean Ditas, was leading. He was the kind of creative director. And just feeling like maybe we'd kind of plateaued off a little bit. Like, where's that creativity, or where are we going, or what's the next, like, where are we moving to? Because it just, I don't know, started to flatten out a little bit, I think, creativity wise.
Yeah. It's nice to have that kind of easy understanding of a break, and to kind of, seems like a pretty organic kind of transition.
Well, it's funny. What's funny is we had a business coach early on by his request, which, I was like, okay, like, we're going to business together, we should, I'll accommodate that. I don't know how he felt about it. It was a really good thing, actually.
Did it cut into your $300 each? It was like $100.
Yeah. We were probably paying her like $25 a meeting or something, which was like, oh gosh, can we afford this?
Yeah, right.
But we actually went into it because David and his partner Gary Steele split, and I came in at the very tail end of that, and we actually had a lot of conversations about, okay, how do we guard against that, right? Like, there was this early on awareness of like, well, we want to do everything to make sure that doesn't happen, and yet it's still inevitable. So
yeah, that's funny. My camera's falling. Nice. So then you split off. So what's the firm like now? How many people do you have?
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us, and that includes an intern and my wife Krista, who's our CEO, CIO, COO, everything C. That's another piece, I think. That's a whole nother podcast, which is the business side, and I think we're super lucky because she's so business that we get to be all design. So she keeps that side humming, whether it's HR, payroll, all of that stuff, which is critical for a design firm to flourish. So I'll just leave it at that.
So
But
when did she join? Like at what point did you
she's
start
she's
getting
helping
that?
out. She was helping out all along. She was helping out HT. She was just, and I mean, to her, it's like, I think, it's her passion. Like, I mean, I think she's like, this is cool. Like seeing a small business grow and, keeping things going. But, at the same time, like this year, she spent a lot of time doing contract work as a consultant. So, she kind of dovetails back and forth, and, it's worked out. It's worked out pretty well.
Nice. Yeah, that's lucky. You know, being married to an architect, this household's not very diversified. Like, she's actually on like an AIA conference call over my shoulder that I have to keep kind of muting her. But having that complementary skill set, business skill set, would be nice. But
I'm not saying it's all roses. I mean, there's times where she's like, "Why are you doing this?" I'm like, "Because I have to." So
yeah,
she always kids me because I told her once in time I said I teach because it feeds the soul, not the bank account. And she'll say like, "Well, go feed your soul."
go feed your soul.
Yeah. So
that's funny. Well, I think that's good. Like, going into this next section of the questions, I'm really interested in sort of like what was like the mountaintop moment of your career, and what was the lowest, what was the darkest time of being an architect?
Well, I don't know what gosh, I feel like I'm still climbing that mountain, actually. I mean, I guess I feel like the best is probably yet to come. So I will say, I guess, national, AIA Young Architect. I mean, it's just a moment of like, you're spending all, blood, sweat, and tears doing this and kind of living and breathing it. And I don't know. I mean, recognition, it's nice, but it doesn't, I didn't get a big check with that, right? Like, it's not like it was some payday. So it's nice, I guess, to be recognized. But I guess what that taught me was like, all that does is hopefully bring in more work than better clients. I mean, that allow you to be more expressive. And that's, in some weird way, that's a huge win. Just getting good clients that are like-minded and allow you to do your craft. That's the win. That's the payoff, I think. And so more work is the payoff.
More work, yeah. Because that's huge. Like, I didn't quite realize that when I looked on your website, and I mean, the national AIA Young Architect of the Year. I mean, it's one architect, or is it?
No, they pick about back in 2012, there's like 10 or 12 people a year. I think now it's kind of grown to like 15 or 18, which makes sense. I mean, there's a ton of people out there. I mean, so, but as far as, I guess,
let's get to the good stuff. What's the darkest?
Well, I think we've been super fortunate that we haven't had a lot of projects go south. I think one of the cool things about what we do and what other designers out there are doing is you kind of get intimate with your clients. You get to like know them in some small way, but more deeply, quickly, so that's super important. That we're all investing our time into something, and is it worthwhile? I think is the way I look at it. And I think what has fortified my attitude on, like, I want to know the end user. As odd as it might sound, and I don't know, because I know commercial architects are like, how do you work with people? Like, why do you want their input? And then I look at other, I ask them like, well, how can you not have input? Like,
Right.
Like, that's just like, go off in your cave and design your thing and then present it to the world. Like, it's like, I'm going to bestow this upon for all you little, people to enjoy. It's like, no, I want to craft something with somebody. I want to share architecture with them. I want to educate them. I want them to educate me. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, clients say stuff. I'm like, damn, that's a really good idea. Like, I wish I would have thought of that, So I think this leads up to we had a project. It was kind of at the it was towards the tail end of HT as well, where it was a developer, very forward thinking, very creative, very you know all good intentions. I think is well intended, but I struggled with the creativity was always tethered to, you can't get around when you're developing the fact that there's a bottom line and there's things that need to accommodate that. I mean, for most architects, well, it's a reality for us because our clients have bottom lines too, but there's a profit, there's all kinds of things that kind of go into that equation. And the idea that we didn't know the end users that were using these things really kind of was a moment of clarity for me that I want the relationship. I want that discussion. I don't, it puts me in a weird position because I don't know that I want to do big projects. Maybe I'll do big projects with the right clients if if we're working on it intimately together. But that project just took a turn, and budgets were changing, and we were spinning our wheels on some things, and so it was just one of those things where when push came to shove, it's like why are we doing this? Like it was a great opportunity, and I'm still proud of the work we did. But at the end of the day, it was kind of like we're doing it for an intermediate party, and it was I guess I had to go through that experience to realize I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to be working with this group, but really that group is serving all these other people. So anyways, there's a moment of clarity for me personally, and we've kind of not done that. I mean, worked for developers, but small scale stuff,
Right.
where they're wanting to do something unique. We just worked for a group in Missouri on a multifamily project. And he's like, it was in Columbia, Missouri. And he's like, if you came to Missouri, if you came to Columbia, you'd understand why I want you to do some work here because I want to raise that dialogue. And so, it's under the right circumstances. I think it's good. But I'm very skeptical of working for people who aren't the end user.
Yeah, and that's really interesting how you clarify that like that. Yeah, because I can tell you, on working with the core and show office buildings for a year or so, it's pretty easy just to make those empty boxes and do some cool facades. But I, we haven't got into your teaching at all. But I think with teaching, like I know you're teaching all these different typologies and looking at libraries, looking at these other things. Does it get to you like that itch of I'd like to do some more commercial projects or larger projects, or it's just something you won't sacrifice with that idea you just talked about?
No, I mean, one thing I think, and I'm pretty flexible. I mean, as a person, and we get calls and we do commercial work, and it's small, but it's smaller scale, right? I mean, I'm of the opinion that there's a certain size that you start to get beyond that you can't be personal. I mean, you can try, and I always use Lake Flato as the example. Like I like Lake Flato, and I grew up admiring them because they disassembled a barn, reassembled it, made it into a house. Like they were at the scale where they were working and making, and they might as well have been out there doing it. It was that kind of intimate relationship. They do amazing work. They do big stuff these days. It's incredibly sustainable. It's green. Like, they're probably one of the most prolific firms doing what they're doing. But as you get to campus scale, as you get to these bigger size scales, I see it. I see these moments where they're trying to be like, oh, by the way, we really do these like little moments and these handcrafted things. But it's like saying, like, let's make a skyscraper feel like a neighborhood. It's like, I don't know that it's possible. So, when you say you're working on these corn shells, you're doing some fun stuff, I think that's important too, right? I mean, that typology exists. So
Right.
I'm proud and glad that someone like you is working on them, because they're going to be better than just shoving stuff out the door. So I think it's just kind of the lane you want to operate in. And, I wonder sometimes, am I strange because I enjoy it? And I don't know if it's, good, bad, indifferent. I think it's just knowing who are you, and where do you excel, and what do you get joy from, and just do that. Just do that. I think if you can take away all the noise, or or someone tell me what I should be doing, you get really clear about what makes you happy. And so I think that's really the trick. There's so many levels you could be operating on in this field. So, if messing around with all these different, scripts and doing, fenestration for a corn shell building is like, I just makes you happy, do it. I mean, just find that thing that you love and just keep going. And, for me, I always, I don't feel old, but I definitely realize like I have years behind me now. I mean, it doesn't feel like that long ago where all I could do is look up because there was nothing behind me but school, And now I'm like looking around going, dang, like I'm a middle-aged practicing architect, I feel like an old architect, but
yeah, you keep winning these young architects of the year stuff. So in my intro, I said you just keep staying young, like
I had a colleague from school text me when he saw that post, and he said, "I'm glad to know that you're still considered young, because I know I'm younger than you." And
yeah, you just need to keep restarting your firm every 10 years, and
that's
you
right.
keep getting that. Yeah,
I think
funny.
that's probably sunsetting. I'm pretty sure that was probably the last of the of young.
I don't know.
They need to have a middle-aged.
Yeah, I mean, well, going back to like that passion part that you're talking about, the projects that, and you gave a great lecture at CU a year or two ago, but the projects that I really liked were the vertical cemetery project, and then the other like cemetery house, where it was just so much about like kind of phenomenology in a way, or just about like storytelling and place. And I don't know, but it seems like it's so hard to kind of find the time as a practice to do those type of projects, and to make that work. But I see your firm doing those kind of things. I mean, mostly in my head, because it's tied to your teaching and your methods that you're kind of doing there, and it seems hard for it to not bleed over into the practice. But
I think that's right. I mean, I think that's probably why I do that, because I know it's, teaching slows me down, because
right.
it occupies time. And, again, there's days where I'm like, oh my gosh, should I be teaching? But what am I going to do? Like get 5 more projects that I have to deal with, and then I'm just going to be doing projects all the time. So I do, consciously try to remember like the balance piece, because you can't always, I mean, if you had to be creative 40 hours a week all the time, like I'm guessing you get pretty burnt. So I don't know. I think teaching subconsciously clarifies things in my own head. Like when I'm telling a student, you need to be doing blah, blah, blah. And then I have to look at my stuff and be like, shit, am I doing that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's like, so, but you said something that, where do you get the time? I think you have to, let's call it R&D. You have to, I have to, for my own sake, invest in R&D, because it's academic, it's interesting, it's that relentless curiosity. So, and it's the weirdest thing to talk about this stuff in the office. So we have our intern, and Lauren, and one of our clients, when he was talking to us, said, hey, I'm really like, I want this project like to have these elements, like, well, like James Bond, like, like the layers, the hideouts, like, and although it was just a passing moment, it kind of like just was like my blip went off in my head. Just why does someone say James Bond? And like you right now, you're like, yep, I know what you're talking about. And we all have our own idea of what does that mean, but it's a thing. It's not like, no one's not like, what are you talking about? They're like, oh yeah. So right now we are analyzing villain layers, the architectural qualities of villain layers. And it's really starting to become complex because now we're realizing, well, is it just villains and spies? And so now we're talking, and I'm trying to have this like, okay, we're like a real business, right? And I'm trying to talk to Lauren about. I don't know where this is going, but we need to understand like the qualities and the profiles. And so it starts with Bond. Why do we know what people mean when they say James Bond? Okay, so then there's villains, but it's not like there's one type of villain. There's the villain that lives in a cave and has like the missile silo. But there's also the villain that kind of parades himself like out in front of everyone. So now you got these personality types, right? Some people are really closed off and recluse. Others are like parading around and, so then we're talking about, this idea of sometimes villain hideaways are fortresses. They're technological. Like, what are these qualities that go with these typologies? But then you got Tony Stark. And so then we start talking about heroes, right? I mean, he's got like a glass box, but he's got all his technology. And like we are in real time mapping this out in our office because we're interested in it. And it's not billable necessarily. I mean, it's
Right.
billable, but not like completely. But it's important. I think these are the conversations I'm interested in exploring versus, what's my 3-part fascia? So this is really serious. I mean, as serious as it can be, because I'm talking to her and I can tell she's like, where's this going? Like, why are we doing this? And in my mind, it's like, we'll know when we get there, right? It's the process that we're like, so now we're going to start mapping out, like, well, now we're trying to identify like who are all these eccentric personalities. What we also realize is that spies don't have layers. They're transients. They stay in like really cool hotels, but they don't have places. So like we're learning like this whole genre. But it all stems from some client saying, I want a Bond-like place. And I'm like, why do I'm like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Like, my reaction was like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And yet, do I?
Right.
I don't know. It's an interesting, and it takes me back to a lecture I did at UF a few years ago where someone said, wow, like, you just seem to have like all these cool projects. And like, how do you get those? And without thinking about it, I said, well, I don't know that we get cool projects. I feel like what it is it's like BYOF, man. You have to bring your own fun to the thing you're doing because we don't have to go explore villains in layers. We don't have to do that at all, but we choose to.
Right.
And whether that's on, I mean, most of the time it's not on our own time. I mean, we're trying to wrap this up creatively into projects and things like that. But if you don't take the time to play and to explore, like that's why I love school so much, is because that's what we did. And so I guess I would link it back to this relentless curiosity, right? Like if you're just gonna like let that go and be like, yeah, Bond, okay, whatever, and then get back to detailing something, which in its own right can be fun too, right? But I feel like if you don't give yourself that space and that time, I don't know. Like that's where the culture comes in, and that's where like the fun comes, and then I think people respond to that. And I think people see that and they like it, and I don't know. It's fun. I don't know.
Yeah.
I am interested in having fun for what I do.
I like that. Yeah, I'm really interested to see what comes out of that study. I was just listening to an interview with Elon Musk today, and he was talking about, I want to build a house like Tony Stark. Yeah, and it instantly has that
Right.
connotation, But then he was even like, I'm not going to build this house because I know it's going to take up so much of my mental effort. And I've thought in my head, would I rather spend all this mental effort building a house or getting people to Mars? And I choose getting people to Mars, right? But
That's clarity.
yeah, it's clear. So. So last question, do you know where you're headed? Do you know what's next? You just keep cruising on this good ride that you have going for you so far. Is there any big jump?
I don't think so. I think it's just, keep talking. I mean, keep talking to people, keep having conversations, keep, at some point along this timeline, I started using the word evangelize, like just evangelize design, right? Like, I mean, go out and preach, you know, I mean, what can design do for people? Because I truly believe it. I mean, it's so obvious to me that, you know, we can, on many different levels for many different types of people and clients, whatever level people are working at. I mean, I do think, you know, the thought that goes into planning, into, you know, systematizing things, and integrating technology, like all those things can make such a huge difference in the output. So, you know, I don't really, I don't know, I don't have some big end game in mind. I feel like collaborating, you know, you asked early on, like, do I ever, you know, you asked about the commercial piece of it. And, you know, there's those moments where I'd like to do some bigger stuff, but I don't want to grow my firm to do it. I don't want to become 30 people because I need, you know, a huge set of people to do bigger projects and do CDs. But I see collaboration with bigger firms, you know, kind of more on the front end, the conceptual, you know, kind of more theory and, you know, what's the driving forces behind this project. But, you know, again, you need the right project and the right big project to kind of see that happen. But, you know, it's probably super selfish, but if people keep giving me the opportunities to kind of, you know, study villain, you know, the qualities, what makes, you know, what gives qualities and what are the qualities of these different things that we want to explore, and let us do little, you know, little explorations like that. I feel like I would be silly not to think that's a win. So I guess I'm just hopeful that, you know, things keep going in a direction where we can be creative and apply our talents, you know, with the right clients.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks. You know, I remember this conversation I had with you about a year ago, at least, probably, where I said, I want to make this website, make this podcast, and I want to have you on. And yeah, you know, you're someone that I can really look up to, and appreciate your work and all the curiosity that goes into it. So keep it up, and thanks for talking with me.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you having me on, as well as, yeah, I hope you're just in the infancy of this, because I think I wish I had this when I was looking around to go check out, to say, you know, what are people doing? How are they doing it? So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Well, great. Well, thank you. We'll hope to keep it rolling. So thanks.
All right. Thanks, Alan.
Bye.
You can visit architecting.com, that's architect-ing.com, to see images from this week's guest.
And please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have a great week and keep connecting.